Thank you, Sir Charles. And, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'm very pleased to have secured this debate on the future of the UK steel industry, particularly ahead of the budget tomorrow, of course, and at what feels like a critical juncture for our industry and indeed for the entire manufacturing sector that our industry underpins. The budget is the first major fiscal event since 2018 and the first test of this government's promises to the British people, particularly to all of their new voters from industrial areas. Today, we will make the case to the government that it is now the moment to offer that long overdue commitment to the steel industry if this 21st century foundation industry is to continue delivering for Britain. I will give way.
Nick Thomas-Simmons.
I very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him on securing this debate. Does he agree with me that what's required is long-term planning? Because what we've had with the mothballing of Orb in December is a situation where we could have had an electric steel producer now actually not producing that steel, which would be ideal for the green industrial revolution.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And it's, of course, completely absurd to have, on the one hand, a government that's committed to decarbonising our economy, and on the other hand, failing to support the Orb, which could play a major role in electric vehicles, which play a major role in decarbonising our economy. So it seems that the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. The government must recognise the strategic importance of steel to our country's future. It must also recognise that steel must be front and centre of its so-called levelling up agenda if it is at all serious about tackling regional inequalities. The UK economy...
I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate. Recently, Liberty Steel announced the loss of 350 jobs in South Yorkshire due to, I quote, challenging market circumstances. Does he agree with me that this is concerning because these are traditionally well-paid manufacturing jobs in comparison to the low-wage sectors that tend to dominate the local economy?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I, of course, have to mention the very bad news today of 500 job losses announced by Tata Steel as well. And what this shows is that we just are back at square one. We don't seem to have learned anything from the last years, and that these industries need a government that is going to proactively work in partnership to produce a policy environment and a market environment that's conducive to investment and to these businesses thriving. I will give way, yeah.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? In the excellent Steel 2020 report, there's a brilliant quote on page 28 that says, government procurement and other incentives should be used to increase domestic steel content in manufacturing and construction. It's clearly a significant market opportunity. Isn't tomorrow's budget a brilliant opportunity to support steel?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We need a patriotic procurement policy. We need a procurement which actually gives the right weighting to local value. And let's look at big opportunities like HS2, 2 million tonnes of steel. How much of that steel is going to be British? And let's ensure that we have a British government where every single government department and HS2 are signed up to the Steel Charter. The UK economy can't stand up without a backbone that is made of steel, and it certainly won't be able to level up if it's not able to stand up. Mr. Chairman, steel underpins our everyday lives, from the houses we live in, to the offices we work in, to the trains, buses and cars we travel in, to major infrastructure projects like HS2 and the possible Heathrow expansion. It's crucial for our defence industry and to our national security. I hear people saying that steel is a sunset industry. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is not a sunset industry. It is an industry of the present and of the future. It underpins our entire manufacturing base, from automotive to construction to aerospace and so much more.
Well, Frank,
I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. I think he's making a very powerful case, but would he agree with me? We can't just carry on managing decline. We have to invest, and we really have to invest for the long term. Because otherwise, once a plant goes, it goes. It very rarely is it back in operation again.
My own friend is absolutely right. And of course, we saw the tragedy of Redcar. Once you've turned that blast furnace off, that's it. And that was an act of industrial vandalism, in my opinion. And we have to ensure that we also take into account the cost of doing nothing. The cost of closing these businesses down is astronomical to the government and to the British taxpayer. So let's have a proactive industrial policy based on investment, and let's use tomorrow's budget to deliver on that. I will.
Thank you. Thank my honourable friend Aberabon for giving way and for securing such an important debate as this. The uncertainty of steel production in Newport with the closure of the Orb and the ongoing nervousness at Llanwern and Liberty has had a huge impact on jobs in my city of Newport and surrounding areas. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we need a level playing field for UK steel producers by addressing the energy price disparity, preventing steel dumping and investing in research and development so that the British steel sector can thrive globally?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is about a policy environment that is conducive to driving investment, and businesses are looking for a partnership with government. When you look at the cost of energy in this country compared to what the French and the Germans pay, as you rightly, my honourable friend rightly says, our steel workers are competing with one hand tied behind their back, and they need a British government that is on their side. Let's not forget as well the tremendous value that the steel industry generates for the British economy. It produces 7.3 million tonnes of steel a year, which is around 65% of the UK's annual requirements. It employs 32,600 people directly in the UK and supports a further 41,000 through the supply chain. It makes £2.8 billion direct contribution to UK GDP and supports a further £3.6 billion through the supply chain, and it makes a £2.5 billion direct contribution to our balance of trade. Steel is also integral to the greening of our economy. Wind turbines, tidal lagoons, electric vehicles, and of course, it's far cleaner to make our own steel here than to import it from a place like China, which is a much dirtier steel production, and of course the huge carbon footprint of transportation. But while we can be immensely proud of the contribution that our industry and its workers make, we must reflect on the sector's recent struggles. UK manufacturing has been in decline, dropping from 30% of GDP in the 1970s to just 9% today. And the UK's shift towards a city-centric, service-based economy has made that the UK is now the most geographically unequal country in Northern Europe. In London, we have the richest area in the whole of Northern Europe, but also in the UK, the 5 least prosperous, with West Wales and the Valleys the poorest of all. And let's not forget that steel jobs are good jobs, paying average salaries of £36,000, 36% higher than the regional average in Wales. Port Talbot provides 4,000 such jobs. The wider supply chain benefits are even greater, and the sense of local pride that our community feels in providing the very backbone of the UK economy is immeasurable. But since 2010, our steel industry has been abandoned by the UK government, and that's left us trying to compete with one hand tied behind our backs. After 10 years of Tory austerity, our community has also been left to fend for itself in terms of money being taken out of our local economies. The lowest ebb for our local steelworks in Port Talbot came in 2016, which marked the height of the steel crisis. There are a number of market forces that combined to set the hares racing, including the UK having some of the highest electricity prices in Europe, which have gone on to cost the sector £200 million since 2016. Through-the-roof business rates, 5 to 10 times higher than in France, Germany and the Netherlands, and increased Chinese dumping in European markets in order to undercut European steel workers, with the UK government at one point blocking the EU from taking stricter action against the Chinese. With such little support from government, all this came to a head. Leading the march for steel workers as they always do, Community Union and other steel unions flew a delegation to Mumbai, which I was fortunate enough to be part of. In the midst of a crisis that nearly led to the loss of 4,000 jobs in Port Talbot, our community fought tooth and nail to make Tata Steel recognise that these are real people with real families to look after, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
I think there's an important point to be made, that these are not workers that have refused to change. In fact, quite the reverse. They have really been at the cutting edge. They want to do everything to make the plants as efficient as possible. But with all these other factors counting against them, there has to be a point where something changes.
I fully agree with my honourable friend. British steelmakers make the best steel that money can buy. Of that, there is no doubt whatsoever. And look at the flexibility they showed of the divesting of the pension scheme, where many, many steelworkers didn't think about themselves. They thought about their families, their sons and daughters and grandsons and daughters, and that shows the passion and the commitment of our steelworkers and their willingness to be flexible. I would like to pay tribute to the steel unions and the leadership of Roy Rickus and Community Union in making that happen. Our endeavour at the time paid off. Tata Steel decided against closing or selling the business, and in exchange, the workforce showed incredible sacrifice by voting for the divestment of the pension scheme. In return, Tata Steel put forward a substantial investment plan and promised there would not be a single compulsory redundancy in the coming years. Fast forward 4 years, and we are stuck at square one. While electricity prices and business rates continue to be a thorn in the side of our steel sector, Brexit and Donald Trump's Section 232 steel tariffs are combining to create a hostile policy and market environment once again. 70% of UK steel exports go to the EU, and a basic trade agreement with the EU could potentially cost the industry £70 million a year through additional border checks. And while Trump's tariffs were aimed at punishing China on illegal dumping, they have ended up severely damaging the UK's US exports, which have dropped by 30%, with long products such as rods, bars, rails, construction materials hit particularly hard, falling by as much as 60%. And I'm sure the Honourable Lady for Scunthorpe will wish to say some words on that later. These are tough times, and it is important for my Aberavon constituency and for all steel workers across the country that Tata Steel keeps its part of the bargain by continuing to invest in the long-term future of UK steelmaking. But our steelworkers, who make the best steel that money can buy, are crying out for UK government support. It's time the government put its money where its mouth is and backs this essential British industry. We need a budget for steel, a budget that really does level up. Firstly, the government must take specific action to reduce UK industrial energy prices in order to move the steel sector's costs in line with their European competitors. The government's energy-intensive compensation scheme barely touches the surface and deals with the symptoms but not the cause of the problem. UK steelmakers are still paying 80% more for energy than their French counterparts and 62% more than German companies. So will the Minister today commit to studying UK Steel's 9 recommendations in the report that they produced, as set out in its Energy Price Gap Support report, and to deliver on those asks? They include providing 100% compensation for the indirect costs of the carbon price support mechanism, enable the energy-intensive industries to buy energy collectively, provide an exemption from capacity market costs. It's worth noting that any savings on electricity prices would of course be reinvested in the recently announced Clean Steel Fund and would deliver £750 million of investment in the sector over the next decade. Secondly, the government must back business rates reform to drive capital investment in industry. Will the Minister today commit to the removal of plant and machinery from rates calculations? Thirdly, the government must maximise opportunities for UK steel in major infrastructure projects by bringing in measures to increase the amount of UK steel purchased in those projects. Will the Minister today back calls for HS2 to sign UK Steel's Steel Charter? And will he recognise the potential for the government steel pipeline to support 6,000 new steelworker jobs and contribute £3.3 billion to the economy if each government project were to use British steel? Fourthly, will the Minister commit to using the estimated £200 million in returned monies from the EU Research Fund for coal and steel post-Brexit to boost UK steel sector innovation? Fifthly, will the Minister commit to removing Donald Trump's Section 232 tariffs from day one of the UK-US trade negotiations? And finally, will the Minister commit to delivering on a sector deal for steel? Aerospace, automotive and construction all have sector deals, yet the industry that underpins our entire manufacturing base, the steel industry, does not. And that really is a travesty. Sir Charles, steel is very much a 21st century industry that forms the backbone of the British economy. And this fact must be reflected in tomorrow's budget. This is why Community Union are set to launch a new campaign, Britain, We Need Our Steel, because Community Union know that the UK relies on UK steel every bit as much as their members and the steel workers in my constituency. My constituents and their families and steel workers and their families across the length and breadth of our country are not asking for charity. They are asking for a fair crack of the whip. They are men and women of steel who want the opportunity to compete without one hand tied behind their back and a chance to continue to serve their country by producing more of the best steel around for generations to come. I truly hope that the UK government shares that vision and that they will stand up for steel in the budget tomorrow. Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's giving a powerful speech. Just on this issue of the Gignier taking over the plant in Scunthorpe, does she agree with me that there's a risk now that the government may say, oh, box ticked, that's sorted, this sort of short-term issue is now sorted and we can walk away and think about something else? And would she agree with me that it's vital that that doesn't happen and that we've still got to address the structural problems that we're talking about today?
I thank my honourable friend for the intervention. He's absolutely right. We can't be reactive. We've got to look holistically at what we can do along.
I welcome the fact that the Minister is recognising the deeply damaging impact of the Section 232 tariffs on our highly competitive, not state-subsidised steel industry, unlike China's. But wouldn't he agree with me that the point of maximum leverage is now that these trade talks, if the United States wants to enter into trade talks with the UK in a spirit of good faith and trust, surely it would be at the very least a gesture of goodwill from their side to drop the 232 tariffs, to give the UK an exemption, UK steel exemption 232 tariffs, as a start to fire the starting gun on the trade talks.
The honourable gentleman is tempting me down a rabbit hole. I mean, I'm not here to talk about the specifics of our trade deal with the United States. Perhaps he would want to call another Westminster Hall debate. What I am saying is that absolutely any trade agreement that we have with the United States, the conversations will I think, centre in no small part on industrial base, our industrial base, and on the nature of our relationship in terms of steel. Now, he will understand that we're now in the process of negotiating our free trade agreement with the EU. We haven't started the American trade talks, and I think it would be prejudicial to them. That's my own private view, to start making demands in that round of conversations before we've actually started the formal negotiation.
I thank the Minister for all those remarks, and look, I welcome anything that the government has done and can do to support our industry, but we haven't really made much progress today on the specifics, and the devil is in the detail. There is a crazy disparity between energy costs in this country and in France and Germany. That is a simple fact of the matter, and we need policy intervention to give us that level playing field. It seems absurd to have an energy-intensive industry compensation package which is just paying for the symptoms rather than actually addressing the causes. So I urge some detailed responses on the questions that I asked specifically about energy policy. Business rates. It's great to hear that the government is reviewing, but this is a crisis that's lasted 5 years. It seems incredible to me that we're still reviewing something when we know what the answer is: take plant and machinery out of business rates. Trade, I just think that a gesture of goodwill from the United States side, it would be a welcome way to start these negotiations. And whilst I absolutely recognise that the Minister is not in the room for those negotiations, it is his job to champion the steel industry across Westminster and across Whitehall. So I do really hope that he will champion and be the voice of the steel industry in those trade negotiations. And on procurement, there was a specific question: will the HS2 vehicle that's going to run that project sign the steel charter tomorrow? There is no reason why it can't do it. So I welcome the constructive response of the Minister, but the devil really is in the detail. I would welcome detailed progress on those points, because otherwise it feels like we're using a sticking plaster over a gaping wound. And our British steel industry is the pride of this country. It is the foundation of our manufacturing sector. It is the pride of communities such as the one that I represent and the colleagues around this room do today. So I genuinely hope that we'll see that proactive response and approach from the government in the very near future. Thank you, Sir Charles.